Hi guys, welcome back to ModCons. I am with a very special guest, a British politician who was previously the MP for Chelsea and Fulham 2023 and Hammersmith and Fulham between 2005 and 2024. As a member of the Conservative Party, he's been the chairman, the Minister of London in 2023, has served as the Minister of State for Trade Policy under four Prime Ministers between 2016 and 2024. Also served as the State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth between 2021 and 2022. And as if that wasn't enough, he's been the Chief Secretary to the Treasury in 2015 to 2020 to 2016 under PM David Cameron. Wow. Not only that, you started studying in Cambridge, modern history, and then you went on to banking in both New York and London. And it is none other than the wonderful Greg Hands. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Laura. Thank you for asking me. Thank you. I don't want to add anything to your extensive biography, but
I missed it. I missed something. I knew it.
You missed actually one interesting thing as well, which is I'm the only government minister to have served all five Conservative prime ministers. So
wow.
I'm, in that sense, unique.
That is very unique. So yeah, you are absolutely who we want, because we want you on the show because you know your stuff. But I want to get back to the beginning of, I guess, your career. You studied modern history, and that's when you joined the Conservative Party whilst you were at uni, and then you went on to banking. Was it always the intention that you were then going to go into politics, or did you just sort of say, I've had enough of this, I want to try something new? What happened?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think I was always interested in politics. I was interested in politics at school, and I followed it quite closely. So I remember I was a sixth former at the time of like the Falklands War. Margaret Thatcher at not really at a peak of her power, but just before. She was still a bit kind of vulnerable in that sense to different movements in the Conservative Party and everything. So I kind of got, so I'd done a bit of politics, but at university I sort of did a bit of student politics, but I didn't necessarily it wasn't necessarily my burning ambition to be a politician. I found it really interesting, and I came back to it later on, and after a business career of about 8 years. And it was kind of happened that way, really. So it was kind of always kind of possible, but not necessarily preordained.
And how important do you think that is? Do you think every politician should have a career of some kind, so they've experienced the real world, so to speak, before they get into politics? Or do you think it doesn't really matter?
I think it really helps a lot. I mean, I think the most important thing is to have a diversity of people in politics. And I'm not saying in a sort of in any sort of right-on, trendy kind of diverse sort of way. I mean, people have a diversity of experiences. So people who've worked in the private sector, you want to have people who have been, say, teachers or nurses or doctors or lawyers or whatever else it may be. And I think it is helpful to have done something else first for two reasons. First, it allows you to bring some real life experience to the role. And secondly, I think it's a bad idea becoming a politician a bit too young in life, particularly in today's world where nothing ever gets forgotten. So, I mean, if I'd have been a politician at age like 25 or something, I mean, it would have been a disaster because, the life I was leading was not the life of a public-facing person. Let's put it that way.
Although it could have been quite fun, I guess. I think we need a bit more fun in our politicians.
Well, that may well be as well. But I think you want to decide for yourself what might get out there.
Absolutely. And actually, how do you, when you have like a private life, and then it turns around into being like a public figure, how do you, does it matter? I mean, I'm not saying that you had any terrible things that you didn't want to share with the public, but were there some things that you were sort of hesitant about, or anything that came up that you were like, oh, I wonder if this is going to jeopardize my potential?
Well, I mean, I think everybody does, sort of everybody's got some kind of thing in their sort of like private life past, or even the most that, sort of, it's kind of, there's always something that might get misinterpreted, particularly. Say by a selection panel or by the electorate, or particularly by your opponents. I mean, your opponents will kind of go through you, do you over comprehensively, and the higher up you go, you're much more likely to get sort of done over in that sense. So
Yeah.
in that sense, yeah, I think you do. But generally, I think if you feel satisfied yourself that this is a reasonable thing to have done,
Yeah.
and you can explain it, then I don't think you've really got anything to worry about. I think the electorate are much more understanding of this kind of stuff.
Yes.
And let's say if you once had too much to drink at university, I think the electorate are quite understanding
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
So long
Forgiving,
as
the forgiving
forgiving,
public.
yeah, I mean, so long as it's not something sort of criminal
Yes.
or corrupt,
Yeah.
then I think the level of tolerance is reasonably good. I mean, I remember David Cameron famously saying, he was asked about taking drugs at university, and he said he had a normal university experience, which I think people took as meaning a yes to the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, I think people took that at face value as okay.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And then, why did you want to become a member of the Conservative Party? What happened there?
Yeah, well, I think two things, Laura, really, and both were actually happened abroad rather than here.
Okay.
And I became convinced that socialism and left-wing views were wrong and were actually the wrong way forward. So, first of all, I mean, I had the great privilege of living in what was then called West Berlin.
Okay.
For a
Yes.
few years, literally at the end, the Berlin Wall was about to come down. Of course, nobody
Wow.
knew that at the time.
Yeah.
And kind of experiencing the Eastern Bloc and life under extreme socialism.
Yeah.
I lived in communist Czechoslovakia for a while.
Yeah.
I studied that language as well, Czech and Slovak at university, alongside history and German. So I mean, it was a bit of that, and sort of seeing, and obviously, socialism in a Western context isn't quite like socialism in the Eastern
Yes.
Bloc context,
Yes.
but you kind of like you can see where socialism leads.
Yeah.
And then secondly, I lived in the United States for much of the 1990s, and I became convinced at that point, I wouldn't say it so much now, but the US, I think, was very much a role model. And I thought the UK was still quite restrictive.
Yeah.
The free market in the UK was still very kind of like constrained, I would say. So I became sort of convinced of my own views that I was in favour of the free market, in favour of free trade, and strongly in favour of democracy, strongly in favour of these things, all the good things that kind of would make up a mindset of a conservative person. In that sense, and more in the kind of Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan kind of sense, not necessarily in the sense of like a Donald Trump or somebody like that.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of moving into modern age. So that was really those two formative experiences, living in West Berlin and the Eastern Bloc.
Yeah.
And then living in the US. I think those two reasons made me a conservative.
That's very contrasting. So if you were going to form an opinion, I mean, you're in the best place to do so, because you see it really the total opposites. that must be quite strange.
What it is, I mean, these days, I mean, I say to my kids, they say, Papa, what was it like, socialism? What was it like a communist place?
Yeah.
And I said, well, you've got to go a long way these days. You've got to go to Caracas or Pyongyang to experience it. But at that time, you could go to East Berlin, which was literally, you could get there 5 hours from where we're sat now. Within 5 hours, you could be in East Berlin.
Yeah.
And, experiencing, probably less than 5 hours, 4 hours, experiencing communism.
Yeah.
In a way that now you'd have to travel a long way to get there.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. It's very cool. So okay, you became a member of parliament, and you have, because you had so many sort of amazing roles in government. And then also you have to look after your residents, constituents. How do you juggle the two? Because I've seen you out and about, and let me tell you, he's everywhere. Like, honestly, and all the residents really warm to you. They know who you are. They appreciate you. The amount of times I've been out with you, and people have said, oh yeah, Greg Hands helped me with this, he helped me with that, and it's such a personal kind of experience for them, which is a great thing. But how on earth do you manage to do that and be so personable and in everyone's sort of life, so to speak, as well as doing these big major jobs in government? How does that work? That's quite a challenge.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately, being a senior politician, you end up doing 4 or 5 what I call big roles at the same time. And you have got to, first of all, you've got to manage your life. You've got to become sort of quite disciplined. You've got to constantly sort of trying to squeeze a quart into a pint pot.
Yeah.
And that's not just your political life, you know.
Mhm.
So you're trying to be a government minister.
Yeah.
You've got to be in the House of Commons. You've got to be in the ministry. You've got to be in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
You've got to be in the constituency. You've got to
Yeah.
be working hard in the constituency. Plus, you've got to be, a husband, a father. This is for people,
Yeah.
whatever your personal circumstances
Yeah.
are. You've got your own important personal life going on as well. You've got whatever other obligations. I mean, as happens, my mother is 93. That's I've got so you end up kind of like, I always think of it in a way that you end up doing like 6 or 7 jobs
Yeah.
slightly inadequately.
Oh.
Kind of, you always feel like, if only I guess put more time into this, more time into that. So you've
Yeah.
just got to like rationalize things. You've got very good people around you.
Yeah.
One of the great things about, I think, one of the most successful politicians are people who surround themselves with good people who know what they're doing and work hard.
Yeah.
That is, I think, a real requirement.
How do you find those people? That's just on a side note.
Well, I think that's a good question. I
Yeah.
think you've got to be somebody that people want to work for.
Yes.
So you've got to be, and some politicians are kind of a bit notorious for not being good bosses for
Yeah.
one reason or another.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to have a reputation, build a reputation, somebody that people want to work for. Hopefully, I did that.
Mhm.
You've got to like treat people with respect. You've got to bring people in. You've got to trust people, give them important roles, get
Yeah.
people doing stuff that they're going to find interesting. Because politics is a fascinating
Yeah.
thing to be. I'm working for a government minister, an MP. The best thing is like the variety in that job.
Yeah.
Let's say you're working for an MP in Parliament. One moment you might be recording some social media. The
Yeah.
next moment you might be doing a visit to a school.
Yeah.
The moment after that, preparing the MP to make a speech in Parliament, maybe
Yeah.
writing the MP speech. The next thing, the MP's got a visiting politician from some other country,
Yeah.
preparing a briefing. So there's a fascinating role. But you've got to make sure that good people are working for you, people that you can depend on, you can trust. I mean, unfortunately, there's been a few incidents where I think the politicians are slightly kind of not being such a great person to work for. And then if you're not a great person to work for, it can happen that people will kind of, repay that
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
disrespect.
Karma. It's karma.
Karma. That's probably a good term. It can be karma.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think one of the strong things is be somebody people want to work for.
Yeah.
And then you'll get the best people.
Amazing. And then also, what is your biggest achievement as a sort of a local MP for your constituents? And then what is your biggest achievement in government, in the government role?
I think as a local MP, it's mainly been actually, I mean, Chelsea and Fulham is a very great place to live, as you and I know, Laura.
Yes.
And there isn't that many ways I think the government could really improve life in Chelsea and Fulham, other than the obvious things that affect the whole country, like keeping taxes down, making sure the economy is going well, etc., etc. But I don't think specific. It's not like we're kind of crying out for a new bypass.
Yeah.
So I would say most of my local achievements have been fighting to save things, actually. So, well, actually, 2 things I'd say in particular. One was the big campaign I've run over many years to save our local bus routes, which is so important. But it's amazing.
Blazed in my brain.
Well, it's amazing the number of people who, from all walks of life, who really use local buses. And at different times, City Khan has come along trying to hammer the buses. And now I'm gone, of course. It's now kind of open season on the buses. The 414 has been abolished and so on. So fighting to save the local buses. Secondly, improving access to the tube has been really important over the last 20 years. Again, not something directly under my control, but lobbying for Chelsea and Fulham, particularly the district line. More in Fulham, this is the Wimbledon branch of the district line, had been really overcrowded. It still is a bit overcrowded, but we've got a better balance, and that's been taking years of kind of campaigning, pushing Boris at the time to introduce the S-Class train earlier onto the district line. All these kind of things. So that I say locally. And then nationally, I mean, I think kind of being part of a movement to introduce sound public finances. When I was Chief Secretary of the Treasury, you mentioned I did the longest ever spending review for the government. Reducing government spending over a 5-year period, the longest ever kind of plotted time to have these spending reviews. which was pretty successful, 2015 to 2020. It got blown up a little bit by things like consequences of Brexit and so on, but let's not get into the Brexit discussion at this point. So I would say that was quite a figure too. And then also in the world of trade, signing the UK up to 73 different free trade agreements and joining the CPTPP free trade area, really important consequences. What everyone thinks about the referendum now, almost 10 years ago, it would have been derelict of the UK not to take advantage of some of the opportunities in doing better free trade deals with the rest of the world than we had under the EU. So I saw that as being a key part of what I have delivered in government, was overseeing those negotiations, making those decisions, those trade-offs, 73 free trade agreements, plus taking through the whole process of joining the CPTPP from what was really an idea in 2017 to it taking effect late last year.
Yeah. Wow, amazing. I mean, okay, talking about, I wasn't really going to do that yet, but why not? What do you think? Obviously, we've got at the moment Trump and his tariffs. How do you think that's going to affect us? And, because of Brexit, we're obviously not looped into the whole European Union. And do you think that's going to keep benefiting us, or do you think the fact that Starmer may be sort of saddling up to the EU might compromise that? What's your take on it?
Well, but actually, very good question. I'd say probably a bit of both. First of all, I think the consequence of Trump and his tariffs will be very bad, and it may be a little bit less bad for the UK than if we were still in the EU, or less bad than for the EU. But let's not get away from it. It'll be bad. Particularly the overall impact on the world economy. I think we're already seeing that. Markets, financial markets, I've worked in financial markets for some time, are very good at understanding what is the impact of government policies on finances. So I think the markets have reacted very negatively to Trump's tariff plans. And I think that's with good reason, Laura. I mean, there's the history here is not a good one. The last time anybody really tried to introduce new comprehensive tariffs was the US itself, almost 100 years ago, with what is called the Smoot-Hawley Tariffs Act of 1930, which was part of the Great Depression, part of the causes, if you like, of the Great Depression. And it was an absolute disaster. The US exports and imports contracted by 2/3. That's a massive contraction of naturally, as economies grow, they trade more. Because you create more of a surplus. You think, where am I going to sell my surplus to? I'm going to sell this product or to this market and get buy back this product or this service from them. And it's kind of like, in its very basic form. I've just been in Algeria. Algeria makes dates, and amazing. Sells great dates.
Delicious.
And Algeria, in return, will need machinery. So. Anyway, so kind of as economies grow, trade rises. Just think about what if the opposite happens. In the 1930s, US exports and imports both fell by 2/3. Big impact on the US economy, huge impact on the global economy. So there's bad form there. Second part of your question, what impact does it have on the UK? So I think the first impact will be almost certainly a negative impact on the global economy. And that will definitely affect the UK because we're very linked into the global economy. We're not a sort of an isolated island. Well, we might be geographically, but not economically.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think indirectly, the impact of the UK will be huge. I think then on top of that, there is, if you like, within this rather glum backdrop, a rather grey backdrop, an opportunity for the UK to nonetheless mitigate that by doing a free trade agreement with the United States or some kind of trade agreement or economic agreement with the US. So that's as I think the Labour government is doing the right thing by pursuing that trade agreement. I actually did 6 rounds of trade talks with Trump's team back in 2020 and made a lot of progress. I think it can be done. I just wish they would get on with it a bit faster. And they should have started earlier. Japan, South Korea are ahead of us in the negotiation. That should not have been allowed to happen. Really, Starmer should have been out there, not wait for the inauguration. He should have been out there, really in December or even, later in November, laying the groundwork here. He shouldn't have followed the protocol. You got to wait for the president to be inaugurated. No. So I think he's made a mistake there, but he's now pursuing the right policy, albeit too slowly. So I think then in terms of the EU, I think the UK has to be careful not to align itself too closely with the EU, because the EU is getting hammered on the tariff side, and the EU is kind of retaliating. I know it's suspended it for the moment, but the EU's natural instinct is to try and be a bit macho here in a time when really you want somebody to sit down and get a deal. And that's where the UK needs to be. So if I were the UK, my successor in the UK government, I would be saying, no, we don't want to align ourselves with the EU too much. That is a bit of a hostage to fortune. We want to follow our own independent course. The best place to be at the moment.
Okay, and do you think Trump, we'll stay on Trump a little bit, do you think that he, it's all bravado, and the fact that he's kind of going so hard, do you think that's just because he is a negotiator and he wants people to make a deal and come to the table as a businessman and say, no, let's work this out? Or do you think he's just like an absolute control freak, so to speak?
Well, I think he's probably a bit of both. I mean, I think I think he genuinely thinks, wrongly, in my view, that tariffs are a good thing, will be a good thing for the United States. I mean, Trump's worldview is at the moment at least, I think it's set around the US in the early 20th century, where the US was kind of still growing, acquiring territories. Alaska was acquired late in the 19th century, acquiring things like, the US Virgin Islands, Panama Canal Zone. I think that's his kind of mindset. It's more the time of McKinley as president. This is going back a long, long way. Virtually every president says, I really admire, Reagan, or if they're a Republican, or JFK if they're a Democrat. Trump goes back a lot more further, deep into US history. And at that time, late 19th century, early 20th century, tariffs actually provided about half of the federal income. But that was in an era before the whole of the welfare system, the whole of Social Security. There wasn't even much of a defense budget. I don't think it's not going to be feasible to finance the U.S. government through tariffs. There just isn't going to be enough imports to put the tariffs on in the first place.
Wow.
So I think it's a bit of a fall on hope. But nonetheless, he's a believer in tariffs. But he's also a believer in doing deals rather than a kind of a permanent rules-based system, if you like, which is the alternative. And so he's reintroduced the art of deal-making into international diplomacy, which personally I'm not a fan of. I think it's better to have a set of long-term rules and treaties and so on, rather than sort of short-term transactions, if you like, between states. Because the problem is, I think you've got to set, what is your belief set? Where do you start off? What is the United States for? The United States is for freedom and democracy, free markets, free trade in the world. That's what the US is really there for. And if you reduce the US to like a series of if we were to go shopping down the King's Road and we're going to pop in, do a bit of this, pop in, do a bit of that, and then at the end of it, you might feel a little bit satisfied. But
it's like a patchwork.
You end up with a bit of a patchwork, and there isn't really necessarily a theme to this. Whereas if you set out, this is what I want to do, this is what I stand for, so on, then you have a different approach. So I think Trump, is not following the right approach, but there's an opportunity for the UK.
Okay, interesting. And then just one more on Trump. What do you think about his sort of Doge, cutting all this extra fat in the? What do you think about that? And should we adopt something similar?
I'm kind of partly a fan.
Okay.
Because I think the UK government, going back to the spending review I did, one of the things that undid part of it was the expansion in the size of the government after Brexit. There's not really a Brexit point, but I think Theresa May, definitely Boris Johnson, allowed the size of the government to grow. And the argument was that, we're taking all these new functions after Brexit that we didn't used to do because they were done by the EU. We need people to help the EU negotiation. Fine. But that sort of thing happens in government all the time. Whenever someone comes along, I used to say to me, whenever somebody came to me and said, Minister, there's a new priority here. We've got to do more of this. I would say, well, what about, the old priorities you came to me last year with? Are these less of a priority? And they'd say, oh, no, they're still a priority. And if you keep loading in new things to do, then inevitably the size of government increases. What you've got to do is, if you are going to increase, for example, at my time, I was increasing the size of the security forces. the special forces and Britain's intelligence agency.
Yeah.
That seemed to be the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Even if, at the same time, the size of the army, we're reducing the number of infantry, but increasing the number of, cybersecurity people,
Yeah.
to kind of conceptualize it.
Yeah.
And that I think was absolutely the right thing to do. Whether that's right now,
Yeah.
we probably do need more infantry. We probably do need more people in special forces.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I think, and I think the UK government has got too big. The size of the Treasury alone is 50% bigger than I was Chief Secretary of the Treasury. The number of people working for HM Treasury, 50% bigger than it was 10 years ago. And I don't think it's possible to argue, really, that the Treasury function has got 50% bigger. So I think we do. But the way to do it isn't to sort of come in with a chainsaw, fire a whole load of people, get rid of a whole load of government functions.
Yeah.
For two reasons. First of all, that you'll find that the costs of doing that will sometimes be too big.
Yeah.
Secondly, you'll find it devastating for morale of people there, because nobody likes to work in an environment where the boss has declared war on you.
Exactly.
So you don't want to do it that way. I think the better way to do it is things like, a slow down recruitment process, look for voluntary redundancies, slim down places. Don't evolve, not have a revolution.
Yeah.
Do government by evolution.
Yeah.
So let's say, for sake of argument, you think there's too many people working in the Environment Agency. Mm-hmm. Then maybe you put a recruitment freeze on the Environment Agency. You don't replace positions that are becoming vacant. You find somebody internally. That's a better way to do it, rather than suddenly come along and say, I'm going to shoot every fifth person. I'm not physically.
No, obviously metaphorically.
Yeah, metaphorically. Yeah.
But I mean, I guess so. There is, it's a bit aggressive, but that's what I think Trump is.
I mean, it's really bad for morale. Actually, my experience, civil servants are not very popular in the Conservative Party, but civil servants are great. In general, not all of them, not every single one, but in general, civil servants do a fantastic job for the country. They're really capable people.
Yeah.
And yes, there are too many of them. Yes, we need to reduce the size of the civil service. Mm. But you've got to take people with you.
Yeah.
If you were to suddenly say, like a Starmer, coming in basically sort of saying, you're all hopeless, I'm going to get... I mean, how does that help the people who you're gonna need to work for you, the ones who are going to stay on?
Yeah, it doesn't help at all. Okay, talking of Starmer, how do you think Starmer and the Labour government are doing at the moment? Just overall, what's your take?
Well, obviously, I've got a perspective here as a long-standing Conservative politician, but I don't think I've ever seen a new government, as opposed to a new Prime Minister, which is a bit different. So we've seen quite a few new Prime Ministers over the last 14 years. But this is a brand new government. I don't think I've ever seen a new government start so badly, to be frank.
Yeah.
They have done a lot of really bad decisions, like last summer, cutting the pensioner winter fuel payment, while simultaneously giving train drivers, junior doctors, all of the most sort of militant people in the public sector, big pay rises. I mean, that is a really bad, unforced error. It's not actually, going back to history, it's not unlike the error made by Harold Wilson in 1974, big public sector pay rises after Labour came back into office in February 1974. One of the first things he did was pay the miners what they were demanding. That was the wrong course. And Labour spent 5 years really regretting, at that time, in the 70s, the decisions they made early on. Basically cave into the public sector unions. They spent 5 years trying to claw back, and they never made it.
Yeah.
That, I think, is going to be the fate of Starmer. He's going to spend 5 years regretting the decisions made in 2024, and he's already trying to claw stuff back.
Yeah.
But he's making wrong decisions. Like, for example, the Employment Rights Act. This is not something the UK needs at the moment. The UK at the moment needs to become a more competitive economy, not a less competitive
100%.
economy. So he's making a lot of really unforced errors. And I think Britain's economy is not strong enough at the moment for doing things like these additional things. So I think a lot of unforced errors. I think he's basically not very good at communicating either.
Yeah.
To be frank. I think a lot of his ministerial team are very inexperienced.
Yep.
And even then, some of the most experienced government ministers are not the ones put in charge of important parts of the machinery. I mean, think my successor as Trade Minister, Douglas Alexander, former member of the cabinet under Blair and Brown, he should be right up there. I would say Hilary Benn should be probably more prominent in government.
Yeah.
There's some really strong, capable people who
Yeah.
are in the government. But if I was Starmer, I'd get your top team around the table.
Yeah.
You want your first 11.
Yeah.
To be your starting lineup.
Yeah.
Not a kind of mixture of kind of experimental formations.
Yeah.
So use a sort of footballing anecdote, a Chelsea footballing anecdote.
So do you think he's done that strategically because he wants people to just fall in line and kind of not question him, basically? Or do you think
I think it might be more, sometimes people in government, prime ministers, get a bit motivated by how does the government look?
Yeah.
So you end up with people based on, you're thinking of, what does the cabinet photo look like?
Yeah.
Do you have the right male-female balance?
Yes.
Do you have the right ethnicity balance?
Yes.
Do you have the right, mixture of accents, whatever it may be? Really you should be, particularly in the early stages of government, you've got to be thinking about who's going to deliver your agenda the best.
Yeah.
And I don't think they've got the best people delivering their agenda. I'm not going to name individual names, but I named a couple of names I think who really, if I was Starmer, I'd put more prominent.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, let's flip it to the Conservatives. How do you think Kemi's doing? And, what else can she do to kind of be more prominent, I guess, and being more punchy, I guess, against Starmer? And, she's only got a small window with PMQs and, some other sort of media outlets to kind of let rip. But do you think she's doing enough, or is there other things she should and could be doing?
Well, I'll disagree slightly with the premise of the question, Laura. I think she is being quite punchy.
Okay.
In fact,
sometimes I agree.
Some of the criticism is often that she's a bit too punchy, but that's not my criticism. I'll say a couple of things. First of all, I think it is the hardest job in Parliament. Tony Blair said this to William Hague when William Hague was leader of the opposition. The hardest job, or said about William Hague, the hardest job in politics has been leader of the opposition, because you don't have really resources, you're not running anything, you can say whatever you like, but people really aren't always listening. No. And that is particularly the case when you've just come out of government and you've been in government a long time.
Yeah.
So the people, if you think back, I always think about the history of these things. You think back the history of the last 50 years or so. Who are the people who really kind of struggled as leader of the opposition? They tend to be the first leader of the opposition. I mean, Michael Foot, classic case of somebody who had a terrible time. Whatever you think about Michael Foot, I happen to be quite fond of Michael Foot because he's a fan of Plymouth Argyle Football Club. But I'm going on a bit of a tangent. So Michael Foot, a terrible time. He was a terrible leader of the opposition.
Yeah.
William Hague was a very good leader of the opposition.
Yeah.
But suffered rather from the fact the Tories had been in power for 18 years and nobody wanted the Tories back in for a long time. Kemi, I think, is really capable person. I've worked with her quite closely. Very, very smart. Very capable. Very assured.
Yes.
As well, which are vital qualities for being a really good leader of the opposition. I mean, she's taking criticism, I think, wrongly for a few things. She also is suffering a little bit from being kind of attacked from both the right and the left with kind of reform out there, which wasn't the problem William Hague particularly had.
Yes.
And Michael thought it would have been impossible to be the left of Michael. Actually, it was possible to be the left of Michael. Actually, did come under attack. That's true. But look, Kemi. So I think Kemi is in a difficult. The backdrop isn't easy, and the size of her party, 121 MPs, is the smallest main party of opposition really since probably the 1930s or so. So it's a long, long time.
Yeah.
So she doesn't have that many MPs to actually draw on to form her shadow cabinet, etc., etc. So I think she's got a tough backdrop, but I think she's doing well.
Yeah.
I like her approach at PMQs.
Yeah.
She's quite punchy at PMQs.
Yeah,
I like some of the things that I think she should concentrate a bit more on the core economy.
Yeah.
A bit less on some of the more sort of fringe type cultural issues. They can be important.
Yeah.
But focus on the core economic narrative, the sort of things I outlined earlier. Labour's unnecessary tax rises.
Yeah. Labour
unnecessarily big public sector pay rises. To people like that. Nobody likes the RMT and ASLEF. They're kind of like the some of the least popular people,
because they're always striking.
They're always on strike and they're abusing their position. A monopoly.
Yeah.
So I would sort of focus on Labour's core failings.
Yeah.
Go after that.
Yes.
But I think she is actually doing a good job.
Okay, good, good. Well, that's positive. And then also, I guess talking about nationalization, because obviously we got British Steel. We got what is your take on that? Do you think we should be trying to nationalize some of our I don't know, maybe our water because there's so much drama around that, or British Steel or anything like that,
Definitely
or not?
no, I don't think we should. And I
Okay.
fought in government in 2015 very strongly against nationalising one of Britain's other major steelworks. Mm-hmm. Successfully fought against it. Actually. Yeah. I just think it's a bad idea because sometimes you have to on a short-term basis.
Yeah.
Now, it probably was necessary to nationalise Northern Rock at that time back in 2008. Mm-hmm. But you want to do an absolute minimum. You want to do everything else is exhausted. I think Labour, I haven't been following British Steel that closely, but I think Labour botched that whole thing from the beginning. I don't think nationalisation is never the answer. Britain, a lot of the success of Britain in the last 50 years has been down to privatisation, not nationalisation.
Yeah. A lot of people are, I guess, concerned that China sort of, for example, for British run it, and then they're sort of running it into the ground, and then they just go back to China and work with their own sort of companies, and so the priority is not here, it's there. And that, I think a lot of people are worried about that. So what would you say in regard to that? How can you sort of make that less worrying for the public?
Sorry, less worrying for the public in terms of China.
Well, as one example.
Well, I think China. I think we should not be having important parts of our economy run by China.
Yeah,
I think that is. I mean, China is not a friendly country. It's not a friendly. Going back to where we started, Laura.
Yeah.
It is still run by the Chinese Communist Party.
Yes.
And that is not somebody who we should ever think are our friends or people who are likely to be thinking of the interests of the UK.
Yeah.
So we should not be having important parts of our economy run by China, full stop. I don't know enough about the ins and outs of British Steel, but my strong impression is that Labour mismanaged that situation. And nationalisation is not actually the best solution there.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so you were sort of Minister of London for some time. How is that? Did you have to work with the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan? And how did that go?
Well, I'd say, funny enough, it sounds very important being Minister for London.
Yeah, it does.
Well, except it isn't actually that important a role. It was really designed as a role by, I think by David Cameron, it might have been Theresa May, to really kind of keep an eye on Sadiq Khan.
Yeah.
And to work with Sadiq Khan where appropriate, where interests coincided. So, and actually, twice as Minister of London, I did work with Sadiq Khan on things like important infrastructure in London, important developments, that kind of thing. But also part of the role is, making sure that that Sadiq Khan isn't spending his whole life and time kind of attacking the government.
Yeah.
And to fire back from time to time. But it's not that important a job, Minister for London. Okay. You don't have a government department behind you. You don't have really a set of civil servants or a set of people. No. You're a small kind of thing, the London unit, which is like not that big. So it's not that important a role.
Fine. Okay. I was going to go on to the next mayor. Do you have any inkling who the next candidates might be? And do you have a favourite?
Well, I don't, Laura. But I'm pretty sure there's going to be quite strong interest this time. Because when it comes around in 2028, I mean, that could be the time of the next general election, but I think that Labour will probably go longer, go into 2029. So it'll probably be, say, the year before the general election. Oppositions are typically quite strong the year before the general election. Conservatives have been underperforming in London really for some time. Witnessed by, us losing Chelsea and Fulham to Labour last July. Was kind of that's pretty much the low point. You never want to. It'd be hard to go lower, to be fair.
It's true.
So I think the Conservatives, will be on the path to recovery. Reform aren't really a party that appeals in London. I don't think. Maybe in some of the London fringes.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be becoming the next mayor of London is a massive opportunity.
Yeah.
For somebody. So I think the candidate field will be the strongest we've had for some time. We've
Yeah.
had some good candidates over the years. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think actually Sean Bailey was a good candidate.
Yeah.
I think Susan Hall was a good candidate.
Yeah.
But those were years where really the Conservative government was not very popular. It was going to be difficult for the Conservatives to win, and we were particularly the government was kind of like the image was not right for London.
Yeah.
It was kind of more kind of projecting ourselves into the red wall kind of
Yes.
things. So I think the opportunity there to win back London, win back the mayoralty
Yeah.
in 2028 is going to be quite high, quite strong.
Yeah.
My guess is that Sadiq Khan, who I don't think is a very effective politician, but definitely has name recognition, my guess is he probably won't run in 2028. And it's quite hard to lose that election. There's only one incumbent has ever lost that election, and that was Ken Livingstone in 2008 against Boris. It's the only time the incumbent has ever lost. So, you've got quite strong incumbency things. There's no like equivalent of PMQs. Nobody really puts the mayor of London under the spotlight as such. So I think a great opportunity for somebody, but I don't have any. I'm not really. It's too early to look at runners and riders.
Do you think it will? I know you don't know, but the last one obviously was Boris, who was a personality. People knew who he was. He's a bit of a character. Do you think it's got to be someone that is maybe a personality, someone already known in the spotlight, and is probably going to have more sway than, say, I don't know, a previous MP or something like that, or someone that's unknown in the public domain?
I don't think it's necessary for the job. I mean, if you look at Sadiq Khan, who's become London's longest-serving mayor, he was definitely not a personality when he became mayor. Actually, he's not really much of a personality now either. So it can be done to be mayor of London, be elected mayor of London without being a personality. Probably better to have some name recognition. Boris certainly had that. But I don't think that is an exclusive kind of thing. I think you can have somebody who will project being able to run London well. I think there's a perception out there at the moment that London's not run well, whether it be transport, whether it be high levels of tax going to the mayor of London. The size of the bureaucracy has grown. He's more than they've had to sell off the old building because they can't fit everybody in anymore, and move to a building out in don't even know where it is. Actually. I think it's somewhere quite far east of us. And so I think you don't need to be a personality.
All right, fine. And then obviously you're on ModCons. So what's your sort of take on modern conservatism?
Well, I think we need always, conservatism always needs to regenerate itself, both people and ideas. We never do well when we kind of rerun the people from last time who kind of but whether actually even if they did a good job, there's kind of a perception where we've had that person. So I think we need to regenerate ourselves with new people, new ideas, harking back to the old principles though of individual liberty, small size of the state, low taxation, free markets, individual freedom, etc. These are the sort of things that conservatives are built on. So you've got to stick to those principles, but adapt them to modern circumstances. It's too early at the moment, I think, to have a whole set of policies because we're 4 years away from the next, or at least probably 4 years away from the general election. But I think Kemi is doing the right thing by setting out a set of principles. And I think we need to also be thinking a bit more about the electors, the parts of the electorate that we've lost. And here I think the danger is too many people in the Conservative Party are thinking about seats that we won in 2019 and lost in 2024. So there's red wall seats in the northeast of England, in North Wales, in Lancashire. And but don't forget also the seats that we've lost in what ought to be core Conservative seats in London and the southeast. Where we are stood today. Well, let's say if we were stood at Earl's Court Station. Take the example of Earl's Court Station. If we were at Earl's Court Station, Laura, within 3 miles of Earl's Court Station are 10 seats that the Conservatives held a decade ago. Starting from cities from Westminster all the way down to Wimbledon up to Acton. There's 10 seats there. It's more than the number of seats that we've lost in that time. Red wall seats that we've lost in the northeast of England or something. That is a massive. in a place like Battersea, which is a Conservative seat until 2017.
Yeah.
We had a great candidate there, Tom Pridham, at the last election, did a great job, but we didn't come close.
Yeah.
So we need to rebuild our support, particularly amongst young professionals. I think that is a really priority audience, because we never win elections unless we appeal to young professionals. And therefore, we have to appeal better on issues like housing, basic cost of services. People who, are, for sake of argument, age 35, 40, 30 to 40, living in London, who have got actually quite well paid. Anybody in the rest of the country, that is a really well paid job. Getting paid, for sake of argument, 60,000, something like that. If you want £60,000, it's quite a struggle to. I mean, it's not a struggle to live on £60,000, obviously, but it's a struggle to do all the things that you might want to do.
Yeah.
Like starting a family.
Yeah.
Buying a home, buying a flat.
Yeah.
That is. I think we need to be thinking about that sort of person.
Yes.
Not just the people who started to vote Conservative the first time due to Brexit, 2017, 2019.
Yeah.
How do we win them back? How do we take on reform? That's an important part of the electorate.
Yeah.
As important part of the electorate, the people we lost to Labour and the Lib Dems, because the perception was that Conservatives didn't really care about their issues.
Yeah.
Or that they, after 14 years of Conservatism, they were no closer to being in a position to buy a home, no closer to position to feeling comfortable about the finance of starting a family.
Yeah.
Those are the sort of people we need to be thinking about really strong.
Yeah. I agree. And then obviously you were talking about people that lost their seats. Unfortunately, you were one of the people that lost their seats in the last election. Actually, we were gutted, absolutely gutted. Just to say that, it's
Thank
true.
you, Laura. I'll come in and do a sequel to this.
I hope so. But yeah, it was really. It was such a blow, and it was such a small number as well. It was just gutting. But for us, it was gutting. For you, how must that have felt? Like, were you expecting it, or were you just you didn't? I don't know.
Yeah.
What did you?
I mean, I've been around a long time, so and going into politics, into elective politics.
Yeah.
The quid pro quo is that one day you're going to get given the boot because the people have had enough of you, or I think probably more likely had enough of the party.
Yeah.
Or maybe both. So I think you kind of like. Thank you. I think you kind of know that one day this could happen.
Yeah.
One day it may well happen.
Yeah.
So I think you always kind of, at the back of your mind, you're always thinking, one day this is going to happen.
Yeah.
What would you do? And I always thought it was a bit 50-50 going to that election.
Yeah.
I thought it was a bad decision by Rishi to call the election at that time. I think it was a bad decision overall, a particularly bad decision for us in Chelsea and Fulham.
Yes. Because
a lot of the particularly more conservative electors in Chelsea and Fulham are just less likely to be here in July than they would be in, say, October or November.
That's true.
So I'm absolutely convinced, there's no point really getting too upset about it, or upset at all about it, but I'm convinced that if the election had been held at the right time, so October, November 2024, we would have won not 121 seats, but we would not have won the election, but we might have won 160 seats.
Yes.
Including Chelsea and Fulham.
Yeah.
So I think that was a bad decision to go for that July. It was needlessly to go for that July election. It was a terrible decision.
Why do you think he did that?
I think my guess is, and nobody, as with all these things in government, when you talk to all the people involved, all of them kind of say, well, it wasn't. I agree, it wasn't my decision.
Yeah.
I think, well, whose decision was it?
Whose was it?
It's kind of like failure is an orphan, as they say.
Yes.
This was definitely the case of an orphan decision. Nobody seems to own up to wanting to do it. My guess, the only guess I can have is that they're trying to regain the initiative. Everything was going badly, it was being hammered all over the place during the first half of 2024. And my guess is that one day somebody just decided, I've had enough of this, I'm going to surprise everybody, I'm going to call the election now.
Yeah.
Well, but I think that was a bad one.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard rumours, I'm not sure, but they were concerned by sort of the immigration thing, so illegal immigration, and the summer was going to be good weather, so that perhaps maybe more boats would come over and they wouldn't be able to handle it. And, the fact that the Rwanda plan was in place, however, no plane had taken off. Would you think that had anything to do with it? A bit of a didn't want to get any more bad press on that?
Well, look, I mean, I think immigration is an important issue, but I don't think immigration is the number one issue. And small boats is very important, and people don't like it, rightly. But I don't think it's really the main thing people are going to vote on. The main thing people are going to vote on is the state of the economy.
Yeah.
And the economy was getting better through the course of 2024, not getting worse. So I think it will be a better result in October or November.
Yeah.
In almost any scenario. So it's one of the worst decisions I think I've ever seen, to be frank.
Oh, ouch!
And I've been in government
a long time.
I've seen some bad decisions.
Yeah. Yes, you
I've
have.
even been in the room when some bad decisions have been made. Thinking,
what's that like? Give us, come on, give us an exclusive here.
Well, I mean, I was in the room where I thought it was about. I mean, I think he was right in the end, Cameron, to hold the Brexit referendum. But at the time, I thought it was a bad decision.
Yeah.
Ironically, I thought it was a bad decision because I was a Eurosceptic, and I didn't want us to integrate more into the EU.
Okay.
But I thought that Remain would win the referendum.
Yeah.
And I thought future Labour governments in particular, but maybe even some Conservative governments, would take it as meaning a green light to further integration into the EU. So I was opposed to holding the referendum, but for the reason I thought Remain would win. And I thought it was better to keep fudging in that sense.
Yeah.
But I think in retrospect, I think it was the right thing to do to ask the British people. So anyway, so that's an example of a decision where I thought at the time that's a bad decision. I was even in the room for that.
Yeah.
And argued against it. But I think in the end it probably was the right decision. I think Cameron was actually right. There's many things with David Cameron. At the time you think, I'm not sure about that, David, but I think he turned out to be right.
Okay.
So I think that was, I think the early election, I was not in the room. I thought it was just terrible. And by the way, it wasn't just me. Anybody knew anything in the Conservative Party about elections, election campaigns. I mean, you could just knew. They all knew. Everybody knew anything about it.
Yeah.
Thought this is a terrible decision.
Yeah.
People who had not had experience within the party or not had experience of running elections or understanding an election, they were the people, I think, who thought this is a good decision.
Wow. Well, on that note, what's next for you? What are you up to these days? What's going on? What can we look out for? Are you going to get back into politics?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of like, I'm still doing some, Laura, I'm still doing some media appearances.
Yeah.
I'm still going at campaigning. We had a council by-election back in February. I'm not doing as much as I used to, obviously, because I was pretty much at it 24/7.
Always, everywhere.
So I haven't ruled anything out, but I'm probably looking at the moment to do something in the private sector.
Yeah.
And go back to almost having potential, like, to go back into the private sector for a while.
Yeah.
But so I'll keep my options open.
Amazing. Well, is there any sort of last, sort of final nuggets of inspirational information you want to share with us?
Well, I think more just to repeat a couple of points if I might. I think it's really important the party thinking about where it's going to go. Thinks about the Conservative Party. You've got to win an election in normal circumstances. You've got to get 40% of the vote across the UK, or at least across England and Wales.
Yeah.
To get 40% of the vote, you've got to appeal to quite a broad set of electors. So you've got to appeal. Of course, you've got to face down reform. But at the same time, you've got to win back voters who either stayed at home or dabbled with the Lib Dems or even dabbled with Labour.
Yes.
So you've got to set out a stall that, if here's your whole electorate, there is your 100% of the electorate. You've got to be thinking about, you might shave off 10% here on the kind of the right sort of fringe, 50% of the left, and you want to go, how do I appeal to anybody who is 50 to 90% centre right to the right? That's where you want to pitch. So you want to pitch about here.
Yeah.
That is where your central pitch wants to be.
Yeah.
Make sure you're not way out here chasing that 10% who are never going to vote for you, and nor do you want to be like too far to the left. You want to make sure that pitch is kind of right. And you've got to be thinking about different types of electors, particularly, like I mentioned, the younger professionals. It is we've really, really turned off a lot of people in that area. We've got to find a way of getting back into that space.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much. Greg Hands, what an amazing chat. Honestly, it was so insightful. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Modcons, thank you for watching, and we will see you again Mondays, middays. Bye.
Bye-bye.